They called it extreme weather, and a way to neutralize the storms.
There were a series of storms building.
This movie was easy to laugh at in 2017. A giant satellite system controlling the weather. Cities freezing in seconds. Streets turning into fire. Politicians hiding secrets while the whole planet waits for a machine in orbit to save it. On paper, Geostorm sounds like the kind of disaster movie that wants to be taken seriously, and then immediately makes that impossible. But that is also why it feels stranger now. Not because the movie suddenly became scientifically accurate. It did not. Not because it predicted exactly what would happen. That would be the wrong way to read it. The uncomfortable part is quieter than that. The uncomfortable part is that the emotional logic behind the movie feels easier to understand today than it did when it came out. In 2017, the idea of a global system built to control the weather felt like pure popcorn chaos. It was a big Hollywood answer to a big Hollywood problem. The weather is out of control, so humanity builds one enormous machine and calls it safety. That was the fantasy. That was also the warning hiding inside the fantasy. Now think about how weather feels in American life today. Heat alerts on phones. Wildfire smoke turning the sky strange hundreds of miles away from the fire. Flood warnings. Hurricane tracks. Air quality maps. Grid pressure. Evacuation zones data. Arguments about climate change that never stay only scientific because they become political, economic, personal, and local almost immediate. The weather is not just something outside the window anymore. It is something we check, monitor, refresh, debate, insure against, move away from, and get warned about. That is where Geostorm starts to feel different. The movie is loud. It is messy. It is not subtle. But underneath all of that noise, it asks a very American question. When a crisis becomes too big to emotionally handle, how quickly do we start hoping somebody will build a system big enough to handle it for us? And that hope is not stupid. It is human. When the sky feels unstable, control sounds comforting. When politics feels slow, technology sounds clean. When the future feels complicated, one machine sounds simple. But Geostorm takes that comfort and twists it. The system built to save the world becomes the thing that can destroy it. The fix becomes the danger. The control room becomes scarier than the storm. That is the real reason this movie has aged in such a strange way. Its details are ridiculous, but its fear is not. It understands a nervous feeling that has become more familiar. We want protection from systems we do not fully understand, run by people we may not fully trust, solving problems we cannot ignore anymore. So the question is not whether Geostorm was right about the future. The better question is why its worst idea feels less absurd now. There's also something very American in the way the movie treats fear. It does not imagine people quietly adapting. It imagines people scaling up. Bigger maps, bigger rooms, bigger machines, bigger authority. The crisis becomes too large for ordinary politics, so the story reaches for something above politics, above borders, even above the clouds. That is why the premise still works as a doorway. It is not asking whether the machine is realistic. It is asking why the dream of the machine feels so emotionally available.
Shut down all Central Asian.
Afghan satellite 096.
The most American part of Geostorm may be the belief that if a problem is big enough, someone will build a machine for it. That is the heart of the movie. Before the story even becomes a thriller, before the sabotage, before the countdown, before the cities start falling apart, the film begins with a very simple, emotional promise. The planet got dangerous. People were scared. Governments failed to respond fast enough. and then technology arrived as the adult in the room. The weather was chaos. The machine was order. That machine is called Dutch Boy. In the world of the film, it is a satellite network designed to control extreme weather across the planet. And as a plot device, it is completely enormous. It sits above every country, watches every system, adjusts the climate, and turns disaster response into a dashboard. But as a symbol, it is even more interesting. Dutch Boy is not just a satellite system. It is the fantasy that every messy problem can become an engineering problem. And once a problem becomes engineering, it feels less political, less emotional, less human. You do not have to argue about responsibility. You do not have to change behavior. You do not have to deal with the uncomfortable reality that climate, infrastructure, energy, money, and public trust are all tangled together. You just build the fix. That is why the movie feels connected to a very current American mood. The United States is used to the language of technological rescue. When something is broken, there's often a platform, a model, a startup, a dashboard, an app, a satellite, a private contractor, or an artificial intelligence system being offered as the cleaner answer. Sometimes those tools help. Sometimes they are necessary. But the emotional pattern is still worth noticing. Big crisis. Big system. Big promise. Geostorm takes that pattern to the most extreme version possible. If weather is the problem, control the weather. If disasters are too expensive, stop them before they start. If the sky is becoming unpredictable, make the sky manageable. And for a moment, that fantasy feels beautiful. Of course people would want it. Of course, a world full of fire, flood, drought, and storms would dream about a machine that could calm everything down. There is a reason the system in the film is introduced as a triumph. It is humanity saying, "We did it. We finally made the planet safe." But that is the trap. The more powerful the safety system becomes, the more dangerous its failure becomes. A small mistake is no longer small. A corrupt decision is no longer local. A hidden malfunction is no longer just a technical issue. When one machine is responsible for protecting everyone, everyone becomes vulnerable to the same machine. That is the part Geostorm gets emotionally right. The film is not strongest when it shows landmarks being destroyed. That is standard disaster movie language. It is strongest when it suggests that the thing we trust most might be the thing that scares us most, because we have already built our lives around needing it to work. That is a different kind of fear. It is not the fear of nature being powerful. People have always known that. It is the fear of dependency. The fear that the solution has become too large, too centralized, too technical, and too far above ordinary life for anyone below it to understand what is really happening. In other words, Dutch Boy is not just a machine in the movie. It is the feeling of looking at a crisis and hoping the answer can be built somewhere above us.
Duncan Taylor, systems know it, and
Once you pass the minimum threshold,
all right, let's pull up every.
Most people in Geostorm do not control the weather machine. They just have to trust that someone else does. That is where the movie becomes more interesting than its own spectacle. Because in a normal disaster movie, the threat is visible. The wave is coming. The fire is spreading. The storm is moving across the map. You can see the danger, even if you cannot stop it. But in Geostorm, the real danger is hidden behind screens, access codes, chain of command, political briefings, technical explanations, and people in rooms making decisions that most of the world will never see. That is a very modern fear. A lot of American life already works this way. Not in the exaggerated control sense, but in the emotional sense. People depend on systems they cannot see. Power grids, forecasting models, emergency alerts, insurance calculations, satellite networks, hospital networks, banking systems, air traffic systems, social platforms, infrastructure dashboards, algorithmic tools. Most of the time, these systems are invisible because they work. They only become emotionally real when they fail. And when they fail, the first question is rarely just technical. It becomes, who was responsible? Who knew? Who ignored the warning? Who had the authority? Who made money from the system? Who was supposed to protect the public? Who can be trusted now? Geostorm takes that everyday anxiety and makes it cinematic. The weather machine is far away in orbit, but the consequences land on ordinary bodies in ordinary places. Heat, ice, wind, fire, water, Dante. The people below do not get a vote in the moment. They experience the decision after it has already been made somewhere else. That is why trust matters so much in this movie. Not trust in one hero. Not even trust in one government. Trust in the idea that the system itself has guardrails. That nobody can quietly turn public safety into private power. That no crisis tool becomes too important to question. That experts, officials, engineers, and leaders are all somehow kept accountable by something bigger than their own confidence. That is a hard thing to believe now. American audiences are not all anxious in the same way. Some viewers are more worried about climate change. Some are more worried about government overreach. Some are more worried about corporations. Some are more worried about misinformation. Some are tired of every issue becoming a fight. But the shared feeling is still there. When a crisis happens, people do not only ask what went wrong. They ask who is telling the truth. And Geostorm understands that crisis is not only about impact. Crisis is also about information. The film is full of control rooms, maps, monitors, briefings, and people trying to interpret signals before the next disaster hits. That visual language has become incredibly familiar. We already watch disasters through screens before we see them outside. We see radar colors, warning zones, smoke maps, live tracks, satellite images, government alerts, local updates, numbers moving in real time. The screen becomes the place where fear is organized. But organized fear is still fear. That is why the film's technology does not have to be realistic to feel emotionally recognizable. The question is not whether a satellite network could control weather like this. The question is why we recognize the feeling of being downstream from decisions made by systems we cannot touch. And once that feeling is in the movie, the storm becomes almost secondary. The real suspense is not only what the weather will do. It is whether anyone in power can still be trusted with the weather. And that trust is complicated because it is not only rational. People can know that experts matter and still fear being misled. They can want emergency coordination and still worry about who controls the message. They can believe in science while being exhausted by institutions using crisis language badly. That tension is everywhere in the American mood, and Geostorm turns it into a visible shape. A planet waiting for signals from rooms it cannot enter.
Hong Kong satellite 022.
Once the sky can be controlled, the sky becomes political. That is one of the quietest ideas inside one of the loudest disaster movies. Geostorm is full of giant images, but the more interesting thought is almost simple. If weather stops being something that happens, and becomes something that happens and becomes something that can be managed, redirected, delayed, intensified, or weaponized, then weather is no longer just weather. It becomes power. That is why the sabotage plot matters less than the condition that makes sabotage possible. The film needs a villain, because Hollywood disaster stories usually need a face for the danger. But the deeper fear is not one bad person. It is that the system is powerful enough for one bad person to matter that much. A tool that can protect entire countries can also threaten entire countries. A machine that can prevent disaster can create disaster. A platform built for public safety can become leverage. And suddenly the question is not only, can we control nature? The question becomes, who controls the people controlling nature? That question lands differently in the United States. American culture has a long relationship with distrust and authority. Checks and balances, private contractors, federal power, state power, military technology, big tech, emergency powers, secret programs, public safety, individual freedom. These ideas do not always sit peacefully together, and disaster makes them even more tense. Because during a crisis, people often accept forms of control they would normally question. They want warnings. They want coordination. They want experts. They want response. They want someone to be in charge. But they also fear what happens when being in charge becomes too convenient, too opaque, or too permanent. Geostorm exaggerates that fear into orbit. It imagines a crisis tool so massive that the whole world depends on it. And once the world depends on it, control over that tool becomes more than technical access. It becomes political authority. Whoever can manipulate the system can manipulate safety, geography, life, death, panic, and public perception. That is not a subtle metaphor, but it is a useful one. Because climate and weather are already difficult to separate from power. Who gets protected from floods? Who can afford air conditioning during heat waves? Who gets reliable warnings? Who has insurance? Who lives near fire risk? Who has the money to rebuild? Who is blamed for not leaving? Who is told to adapt? Who profits from the tools of adaptation? A disaster movie cannot answer all of that. It should not pretend to. But it can accidentally point at the emotional shape of the problem. The weather affects everyone, but not everyone has the same shelter from it. That is what makes the fantasy of weather control so unstable. At first it sounds universal. Save the planet. Protect everyone. Stop the storm. But the moment control exists, the next question is distribution. Who gets the benefit? Who takes the risk? Who makes the call? Who is sacrificed quietly because the system is designed around someone else's priority? Geostorm turns that anxiety into a thriller because thrillers make power visible. They give control rooms, secret files, locked doors, and hidden motives to something that in real life is usually more complicated and less cinematic. But the emotional truth still survives. If the sky can be managed, then the sky can be contested. And if the sky can be contested, then a storm is no longer only a natural event. It becomes a political event wearing the mask of weather.
No doubt the same person that tampered with the home.
This is everything you copied off the satellite.
The reboot will flush out the system.
The movie uses giant disaster language. America now lives with smaller versions of that language all the time. That may be the strongest reason Geostorm feels different today. Not because cities are freezing in seconds or deserts are exploding exactly like the film imagines. The connection is not literal. It is emotional. It is the way disaster language has moved closer to everyday life. heat advisory, air quality alert. But watch. Hurricane warning, evacuation zone, red flag warning, grid emergency, boil water notice, smoke map.a, cooling center, insurance risk, fire season, storm surge, power outage. These phrases do not feel like movie dialogue anymore. They feel like phone notifications, local news banners, weather app updates, school closure messages, and conversations people have with neighbors before deciding whether to leave, stay, charge devices, buy water, or check on family. That is an American connection Geostorm could not fully have in 2017. The United States is too large and too regionally varied for one climate experience to describe everyone. A viewer in Arizona may think about heat. A viewer in Florida may think about hurricanes. A viewer in California may think about fire and smoke. A viewer in the Midwest may think about tornadoes, floods, or strange seasonal shifts. A viewer in New York may remember orange skies from wildfire smoke that began far away. Different experiences, same pattern. The weather is no longer just background. It interrupts plans. It changes insurance. It strains grids. It reshapes housing decisions. It becomes part of politics, school calendars, public health, and personal risk. And because of that, the emotional distance between real life and disaster cinema has changed. Older disaster movies often work because they showed the impossible invading the familiar. The city you know, the landmark you recognize, the ordinary street suddenly becoming unlivable. That was the thrill. That was the shock. But now, the familiar does not have to become completely impossible to feel unstable. It only has to become uncertain. The air looks wrong. The forecast keeps changing. The power might go out. The storm track shifts. The emergency alert sound appears again. The weather app turns into a small daily interface with risk. That is why Geostorm's loudness becomes strangely useful. It says the quiet thing in the loudest way possible. People no longer experience weather only by looking at the sky. They experience it through systems. Warnings, alerts, maps, models, alerts, infrastructure, government decisions, utility updates, insurance letters, news loops, social media clips. The phone becomes a tiny control room. Not because it gives us control, but because it gives us the feeling of watching something we cannot control. That is a very modern form of anxiety. You know more than people used to know. You can track the storm. You can see the smoke. You can watch the heat dome graphic. You can refresh the outage map. You can read expert threads. You can compare warnings. But knowing more does not always make you feel safer. Sometimes it only gives the fear better resolution. Geostorm turns that into a fantasy of action. In the movie, the system can do something. It can intervene. It can change the weather. It can stop the disaster if the right people regain control. Real life is slower, messier, and less satisfying. Adaptation is expensive. Infrastructure takes time. Politics argues. Science explains. Local governments prepare. People disagree about causes, costs, and responsibility. That gap is where the movie becomes a mirror. It shows the fantasy of immediate control in a country that increasingly lives with delayed response. It shows one giant solution in a reality full of fragmented warnings. It shows the sky as a technical problem because the real sky has become emotionally exhausting. So maybe the reason Geostorm feels too real now is not that its disasters are realistic. Maybe it is that the language of disaster has become normal enough that the movie no longer feels as far away as it should. That shift also changes how disaster movies age. A scene that once felt like pure exaggeration can start to feel like a louder version of something viewers already know in miniature. Not the exact event, not the exact science. The rhythm, the watch, the warning, the map, the update, the feeling that the next ordinary day depends on a system quietly working behind the scenes.
Someone sealed off the back door into the system. Still coming.
The hidden fear in Geostorm is not that humans are too weak to control the weather. It is that humans are still human after they get the controls. That is the part every giant fix story has to face eventually. At first, the solution looks clean. Build the satellite network. Stabilize the climate. Protect the planet. Put the smartest people in the room. Use the best technology. Make disaster manageable. But technology never removes human nature from the system. It concentrates it. The same pride, fear, ambition, secrecy, political pressure, terrorism, loyalty, ego, and panic that exist on the ground do not disappear just because the machine is in orbit. They travel upward with it. They sit inside the control room. They write the protocols. They decide who gets access. They decide what is classified. They decide what the public is allowed to know. That is why the film's biggest question is not technical. It is moral. If a system can save everyone, what rules should govern it? If a system can harm everyone, who is allowed near it? If one piece of technology becomes necessary for survival, can anyone truly say no to the people running it? These questions matter far beyond the movie. In real debates about climate intervention, geoengineering, weather modification, infrastructure resilience, and emergency technology, the science is only one layer. The other layer is governance, oversight, trust, consent, risk, unequal impact. Who decides? Who benefits? Who pays if something goes wrong? Geostorm is not a careful policy film. It is not built for nuance. But it does dramatize a fear that sits underneath many real conversations. Once a crisis gets severe enough, people may accept tools before they fully understand the power those tools create. That does not mean every big technology is bad. That would be too simple. Forecasting saves lives. Satellites matter. Emergency alerts matter. Climate models matter. Grid technology matters. Infrastructure investment matters. The answer is not to reject tools because tools can fail. The more useful question is, why do we keep imagining tools as if they can rescue us from politics? Because they cannot. A climate tool still exists in a political world. A disaster system still operates through institutions. A public safety platform still depends on human choices. A machine that protects people still reflects the values of the people who built, funded, regulated, and controlled it. That is what makes control expensive. Not only financially, morally, civically, emotionally. The more control we build into a system, the more responsibility we create around that system. If it fails, people are harmed. If it is captured, people are harmed. If it is trusted too blindly, people are harmed. If it is rejected because no one trusts the institutions behind it, people may be harmed in a different way. There is no version of safety without responsibility. That is the real shadow under the movie's fantasy. Geostorm wants a dramatic villain, but the more interesting villain is the temptation to believe control is the same thing as wisdom. It is not. Control can stop a storm in a story. It can also create new forms of fragility. When everything depends on one solution, the solution becomes the new weather. People live under it. Fear moves through it. Power gathers around it. Failure becomes global because trust has become global. That is why the film's silliness almost helps the essay. Because the movie is so blunt, it makes the question easy to see. Would we trust a system like this if the disasters were bad enough? And maybe the scarier answer is, we might not trust it, but we might still want it.
There's over 1,000 storm warnings issued around the...
Close to the nearest satellites going crazy.
Satellite replacement for Rio on its way.
Maybe Geostorm did not predict the future. Maybe it predicted the feeling of a future where people know the weather is changing, but still want one button to make it stop. That is a different kind of relevance. It is less about accuracy and more about desire. The movie is not persuasive because its science is clean. It is not remembered because its politics are subtle. It is not suddenly better than people said it was in 2017. But it does capture a fantasy that has aged in an uncomfortable way. The fantasy is that the sky can be fixed from above. That a crisis too large for ordinary life can be lifted into a machine, placed in a control room, and handled by people with enough intelligence, enough courage, and enough access. That if the world becomes unstable, the answer will not require years of messy adaptation, political compromise, local planning, personal change, or uncomfortable trade-offs. It will require the right system. That fantasy is powerful because it is not completely irrational. People need systems. Modern life depends on them. Weather forecasting, emergency response, satellites, grids, hospitals, transportation, public alerts. These things are not optional decorations. They are part of how people survive complexity. But Geostorm leaves behind one uneasy thought. The systems we build to protect ourselves can also teach us to feel helpless without them. That may be why the movie feels closer now. American life is full of warnings and interfaces that make risk visible, but not always manageable. We can track more. We can predict more. We can argue more. We can see more. But seeing the crisis clearly does not automatically give people power over it. So the fantasy of control gets stronger. A machine that fixes the sky. A model that sees the future. An alert that arrives in time. A leader who knows what to do. A technology that removes the need for trust. A button that turns uncertainty back into order. Geostorm takes all of that and makes it loud enough to look ridiculous. But maybe the ridicule was never the whole story. Maybe the movie looked absurd because it compressed a real anxiety into one giant image. A planet depending on a system above it, while ordinary people below can only hope the people in charge are honest, competent, and fast enough. That is not a small fear. And it is not only about weather. It is about the way modern crises feel. Too big to hold in one mind. Too technical to understand completely. Too political to discuss calmly. Too immediate to ignore. Too slow to solve cleanly. So we look for control, and then we worry about who controls the control. That is the loop the movie accidentally gives us. It begins with a dream of safety and ends with a reminder that safety is never just a machine. It is trust. It is governance. It is responsibility. It is the humility to know that building a tool is not the same as solving the human problem around the tool. So no, Geostorm is not suddenly a brilliant prophecy. It is still loud, strange, and often ridiculous. But maybe that is exactly why it works as a mirror now. Because the world does not have to become the movie for the movie to start feeling closer. Sometimes all that has to change is the viewer. The alerts on the phone. the color of the sky, the heat in a city that used to feel manageable, the storm track that keeps moving, the quiet thought that maybe nobody has as much control as the dashboard suggests. And after that, a 2017 disaster movie about controlling the weather does not feel smart. It feels nervous. And maybe that nervousness is what stayed.